Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It's only, I guess, everybody in the room, and then good morning, John. I'm Amir Hussein. I'm with Geosyntec. I think everybody here knows me by now. Well, by this point. Deanna, do you want to have any opening things that you want to talk to the group about?
No, I appreciate everybody attending that's here. I'm a little surprised we don't have more attendees today with this policy that we're going to be discussing. So, we sent it out to all of the stakeholders, and anyway, I know this policy changes a lot of how we've been operating. So we are interested in feedback, and so as we go through it today, thank you for being here, and please don't hesitate to, speak up and provide comments.
So Deanna brought up a really good point. There's two very critical policies that we're going to be talking about today. One is the allocation, the groundwater, the revision and the update to the groundwater policy, which would take effect in 2026. So it's not for this year, but the critical deadline is that we need to submit it as part of our revised GSP. And as you can see, I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit, but you can see at the bottom of your agenda that March 6th is the board meeting for Tri-County. And our plan and our hope is to have both of these policies ready for the board's approval on March 6th. I know that's a short timeline, but it is the reality of trying to get everything done before the potential hearing in April. April, if you all remember, April 16th is going to be our one-year date with the State Water Resources Control Board, and while we're not having communication with board staff because of the, at least on the Tulare Lake side, the Farm Bureau litigation for Kings County, we are still operating under the impression that there will be potentially a hearing in April, middle of April of this year.
Can I clarify? You're saying we need to track the Tulare Lake time frame versus the Tule Subbasin time frame? Or?
Yes.
So we want to adopt the GSP that would cover both Tulare Lake and Tule. The Tulare Lake will be done by April, or has to be done by April, and this document, both of these two documents, would be part of the Tulare Lake. Yeah. Okay.
And obviously they would also be included in the Tule document, but they would be one and the same.
I was at the GSA meeting, but what is council telling you, Dean? No communication. I can't imagine there's going to be a hearing, but there's zero communication after the lawsuit.
I think it's unknown. So right now there are two things pending before the court.
Right.
The first one I think is going to be considered here in February. And I get confused which one's which, but the other one is unknown when they're going to consider it. The other one goes the way of the state, then we're back on full force. And if the second, and I get confused which is which, but the other one would take a little bit longer. I think we have to consider operating under the impression that there could be an April hearing, and we really don't know what the state has for Tulare Lake. The state, supposedly supposed to be hands off, but what did that pertain to? Did that pertain to the interim plan? Maybe not. Maybe that only pertained to the fees and things particular in the order. And so they could be, I don't know, it's unknown. So my hope is to have the document, and even if it is still in draft, but to have it with the management actions back to them before that hearing date in April, I think is going to be important.
Okay. So, see, part of it too, being able to walk in and not only have a document, but be able to say that we're ready to implement.
Yes.
as well, right? So two very, very, sorry, Martin, I'm sorry, did you have a question? Okay. Two very critical items. One is obviously this revised allocation program that would take effect in '26, and the subsidence mitigation plan, which we talked about last time, and we've updated it based on some comments we've received. So we're gonna talk about both of those today. All right. Based on our conversations, were there any questions? I don't see any hands raised from the folks online, so I'm gonna keep moving forward and give you some updates on Flurry Lake and the Tule Subbasin, part of which we've already covered. So, Stacy, if you wanna start the presentation, well, actually, you know what? Instead of doing that, I'll tell you what, Susan, do you wanna go ahead and join us up here on the table, and do you wanna update everybody on the Tule Trust, and then I'll do all my presentation at one time, because it's all one slide show?
Well, there's materials still in the middle of the table, I see. I'm Susan, for those of you who don't know me, it's Susan Long with the Tule Basin, Land and Water Conservation Trust. And what I'm here to kind of tell you about today is, if you need more, I have more. The Sustainable Agricultural Land Conservation, program. Sorry, my brain was not, I knew you were gonna go forward, that was yes.
Yeah, well, I was
listening, but my brain just.
No, sorry, Kathy, I'm sorry.
That's okay, no problem. I can get there, just, my brain has to catch up for a second. The Tule Trust is, involved in a number of items here in the Tule Subbasin. One of the things that we are currently working on is a Sustainable Agricultural Land Conservation Program, which is funded by the Department of Conservation. We currently hold a capacity grant with them to help develop the program and identify potential landowners that would be interested in participating in agricultural land conservation. The point behind what is referred to as SALT, what's referred to as, is to help preserve valuable ag land, prevent, or just escaped me, I'm sorry.
Prevent urban sprawl.
Thank you, that was what I was trying to think of, it just like went completely away. Prevent urban sprawl, among other benefits that come along with maintaining agriculture, such as, greenhouse gas, emission reduction, water conservation, things of this nature, as well as sustain our local economy. So what we are currently doing is I will be holding 3 workshops, 2 at the end of February, 1 in the first part of March, to go over this program in a little more depth and discuss how it works, what it takes to be a part of it. We will also be talking about developing priorities for land selection for those that want to participate, trying to identify, where we should be prioritizing participation as we develop this program. The Land Conservation Trust, so just so you know what that is, we would put a conservation easement on your property. It does not mean your whole property. It could be a piece of your property. Each conservation easement is really specialized to that individual, so we work specifically with that individual to meet their requirements, what they're looking for, as well as meet the requirements of the program. What happens is that the landowner, for however many acres they enroll, the land is appraised, and then the development value is paid out to the landowner at 90 to 100% of that development value. The land can never be developed at that point. It has to stay in agriculture. That does not mean you have to actively farm it forever, but it cannot be one of your kids or something, we would wanna make sure we leave out that piece of land, you know, develop on it. It would be monitored by the trust or whichever land trust held, the easement, annually, just to make sure that we maintain compliance. It's not a gotcha kind of program, it's just, we have to make sure we stay in compliance. So it's really about just working together and maintaining those. Any questions? Sorry, I stumbled through that.
So if you have Williamson Act ground already, which you can't develop on already, correct?
Yeah.
How does that
The
change?
difference, from my understanding, is that you can actually get out of the Williamson Act, you cannot get out of the land conservation. When you're in forever. That's the,
And then when you say development value, if you're in an area that
you know, how,
is 100 years from being developed, there's gonna be no value, correct?
I couldn't tell you that for sure, Myron, because, I mean, I don't know exactly how they calculate the appraisal. I mean, I think about where you're at, and it may not be developed as far as, the city, but it could be developed more by the state, the prison's right there. So there is some other opportunity for development, so I think there would be some value. But exactly what that would be, until we did an appraisal and had that broken out, we would.
So, Susan, how much dollars are available in the program, and is it first come, first served?
So the program is funded, through the Department of Conservation, so it's a budgeted item every year. The actual amount, you know, will vary year to year.
Do you have an idea of ballpark of what that number, how much? We're not gonna hold you to the exact number,
Yeah,
but
I'm
just
trying
to
to
give
remember
people an
what
idea.
the amount was for this year. They just sent out a reminder yesterday, so I thought maybe I could find out really quickly. Dollar amount. In the millions, sorry, I should know that.
That's okay, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to put you,
No,
I feel like I'm
that's
putting you on the
fine.
spot all day today.
I was trying to
I wasn't-
remember, and I should have looked it up before I came in here. Let's see, maybe it'll come up.
I think what would be helpful is the workshops
Yeah.
and really getting an idea of what they're talking about. My perspective is that it's really gonna be around towns like, Madera, City of Fresno, Visalia, Porterville. However, it could impact, let's say they're gonna develop that property, maybe some property around Allensworth or something. And a landowner could say, hey, I wanna stay in farming. I don't know how it's gonna dovetail with Sigma and land coming out of production. So it's kind of one of those things where I think there's still a lot, Susan, that needs to be.
There's some things that and that's part of developing those priorities. You know, obviously, we're gonna look at, a priority is most likely gonna be adjacent to any kind of urban space, right? So a community, it doesn't necessarily have to be a incorporated community, but a community itself, would potentially be a priority space. Those that may be, you know, really out there in the middle of nowhere, that may not be the ideal place that we're going to be looking at as far as a priority. And there is some question on whether or not, at one point in time, I know there was a rule that said there needed to be 2 water sources available. Now, my understanding is that that's not necessarily always the case any longer. So exactly though, how we look at that and make those determinations, because they are taking into consideration that there are white areas that do dry farming. So, and that are viable ag land, prime ag land. You know, the website doesn't even say it.
Can they put solar on the property that might
That was
benefit
a
their
question
farm?
I've gotten multiple times. My understanding is it depends on what the solar's use is for. If it is aiding the farm itself, that's one thing, but if it's for personal use of your residence or something like that, then that doesn't count. But, obviously, everything has to go through DOC and be approved, so, and go through that tell you though, because I can't seem to find anything that's given on their website that says how much money they have, that the way the funding works is that, so we're in a capacity grant, we're developing the program right now. We're looking for folks that may be interested and or want to have input on how the program is developed. When we identify folks that do want to participate and that fit into the priorities, and want to move forward, that's when we go after the actual acquisition funds, okay? And then, because we have to have landowners that want to participate to go in. And then you apply for those funds. So it's not an overnight process, it's a very long process. And like I said, there's a lot of back and forth because we want to get it right. We want to make sure the landowner's comfortable. We want to make sure that, you know, you're not over-committing yourself or under-committing. Looks like 91 million, I found something, available for funding in this round. This is the 10th round.
Is there an acreage goal? I mean, a certain amount of ground they're trying to,
They do not set that.
you know?
No, they do not have that in their program requirements. I think, they're, you know, each GSA as we deal with SGMA probably have their input on that, but don't have a acreage.
I think a lot of this came out of the California Farmland Trust work that was being done about 10 years ago. And, the guy, Ed, was in charge of it, so I think there was a lot, there might be some numbers. Of course, we've come a long way in 10 years.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Susan, do you want to remind everyone the date on the workshop again?
The workshop dates are the 25th of February, the 26th of February, and March 11th. All of them are going to be held at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The one in the 25th of February will be in Porterville. The one on the 26th of February will be at the Lower Tule Irrigation District in Tifton, and the one on March 11th will be at the Ag Center.
So you can come to our 26th meeting and then head over to Tifton afterwards.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mhm.
All right. Stacy, do you want to pull up the presentation and we'll jump into the meat and potatoes for today of this? All right, so next slide. I am going to essentially walk you through some very quick updates on the GSP, which we kind of already did. And then we're gonna get into the draft allocation policy that again would go into effect in 2026. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about the updates to the subsidence management plan. All right, so very quickly, Tulare Lake, we'll start with Tulare Lake first. As I already mentioned, there's still no communication with State Water Board staff. We've tried all kinds of different ways to do that. We've gone through the GSAs, we've gone through the consultants, we've gone through the attorneys, we've tried all kinds of different ways, and the state has pretty much drawn a hard line on communication. The things that are still outstanding, which is not a surprise to any of you, is the updated allocation policy, which is what we're working on right now, and the management plans, which is the other thing that we're working on. Tulare Lake is still trying to coordinate their subsidence, and what I mean by that is some of you know, the subsidence minimum threshold is not the same in every GSA, and that is still going to require some coordination across the different GSAs. I will tell you, at least all the GSAs now are underway. The Mid-Kings River GSA, which had gone through some changes and new board and everything else, is now meeting and is underway. And a few of you were in the meeting this week that we had for Mid-King, so things at least in that GSA are also moving forward. We have a standalone document ready to go. We just want to add these two things tweak it a little bit more, and then we're gonna have it, available to Deanna for her review. But these are the two critical items, the allocation policy and the management plans. Next slide, please. So very similar, Tully's in the exact same boat. We need to update the two allocation plans, or the allocation plan, excuse me, and the management plans, for the Tully, and all of that's gonna be discussed today as well. We also have a standalone document ready to go. We're gonna tweak it a little bit as soon as these plans are done, and then give it to Deanna for review as well.
Out of that, Mayor.
So, yeah.
The Tule Subbasin, the State Water Resource Control Board staff is coordinating with Eric Lemus at Pixley and Lower Tule, looking at his plan, looking at the management actions that are very similar to this. What they've said is they're going to comment back on his, and that we should take a look at their comments on his management actions. After they finish reviewing Pixley and Lower Tule, they said the next step would be to do a full review of Delano, Early-Mar, and Kern Tulare because they have the exclusion, and then move to the rest of us. Unfortunately, what that means for the rest of us is we're gonna be cutting up very close to the September deadline when we know anything about what they think about our individual plans. Fortunately, they're, I think, in the Tule Subbasin, somewhat coordinated, almost well coordinated. We do have some issues with minimum thresholds for subsidence still to work through. But unfortunately for the Tule Subbasin, if you'll recall, State Board directed state staff to have an interim plan ready to go in September. So I think that's what we're trying to avoid, is having state interim plan and the state being in control of individual, landowner wells. So that's the goal. That's what we're trying to avoid now more than anything. I still think it's possible if we can get a robust allocation plan and management actions for subsidence, that we could, by end of year, possibly avoid the fees as well. I mean, if they're gonna give Pixley and Lower Tule a pass on that, I don't know why, if we're adopting essentially the same plan, they wouldn't give us a pass on that as well. But September's gonna be here fast, and an interim plan just sounds not so swift to me, so that's the goal.
All right, I'm just trying to see if anybody had any questions. All right, next slide. So, let's talk about the revised groundwater, allocation policies. What I'm gonna focus in on, and you should all have a copy of that in front of you, and you should make sure you have both sheets, the table as well, the charts, yeah. So I'm gonna focus in on the changes on that document, between the existing plan and what we're proposing for the new plan. So first and foremost is a movement away from ET to meters. As you all know, we've applied for a Water Smart grant for meters, and we applied for enough meters for, the wells that we know exist, ag wells. Obviously, we're not putting meters on domestics. And we applied for money for, the telemetry units as well. So either you're gonna get a brand new unit with a telemetry, or you're gonna put just a telemetry unit on your existing, meters if you have an existing unit that meets.
How much do we apply for? How much was in that grant?
500.
Yeah, 500,000, yeah.
And
We have to match, we have to do a 50-50 match on that.
so one step back, I mean, Trent County already has a meter policy. Meters are already required, so
Right.
hopefully this would be, to replace any meters that, don't meet the requirements, and the remainder of the money would be to add telemetry to those that do meet the requirements.
Yeah.
Do they,
But we don't know if we're
that
gonna get the money
telemetry,
yet, so.
is that actual, does it go on an older meter, let's say? Will it work?
Martin, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Will that telemetry setup work on an older meter?
Yeah, it's supposed to, yeah.
Okay.
And that equipment sends the data automatically to whoever's looking for it?
Yeah,
That's what it does?
yeah.
They like to steal that stuff, by the way.
Now,
I got some stuff up in Visalia,
Oh, it's the
Yeah.
thieves.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
so
It is.
somehow, well, it's gotta get installed very
yeah.
intentional.
We'd have to work with all of you to figure out the best ways to make that happen.
Yep.
You know, and maybe it doesn't make as much sense, it might just be cheaper just to say, okay, hey, use this money to buy, and just replace your whole meter, and we went with some inline and some flanged.
Sure.
So there's, you know, depending on whatever you have, the idea is to be able to drop it in.
They're looking at probably awarding in October, so it's a ways out.
Yeah.
So I think all that's going on right now with the government, they don't need to worry about that. I think they'll get it all resolved, so that they can have some of their grants going forward before the end of the fiscal year.
So if you have outdated meters, are they gonna be required to be updated immediately or wait for the grant?
Well, I would say by end of year when we move from, you know,
T to pump?
it's gonna, so the thought process is, when you're reporting your meter data, we're gonna continue NIQ and there'll be a check. And so, if it's close, no problem. If it's far off, then we're gonna have to look at what the issue is and what's causing that. And maybe that's an outdated meter, or maybe it's, you know, the way it's set up wasn't, you know, set up properly to collect the data. So, you know, I think ultimately, because this grant is so late in the process, it's gonna be more for replacement meters or, you know, problems that we're having, or even for those who, you know, are out of compliance with the meter policy, that's fine, but, yeah, it's a little late in the process. I mean, we've had meters required now for 4 years.
Things take time.
Things take time, yeah.
How much does one meter cost?
That's a good question,
It's around $5,000
yeah.
is what we estimated for the budgeting purposes. It's plus or minus. Okay. And then, you know, a little bit more money, or some more money for installation. That's how, and we estimated how many meters there were based on the information we had, and then that's how we did it. And it does require a you know, one-to-one match. So if we're looking at $500,000 from them, we have to match it by $500,000. Okay, so that's a big change, right? If we switch from ET, the way we're currently doing our estimates on how much you're pumping, to meters, you're gonna report monthly, the meter report, you know, values. Obviously, if it's got telemetry, that becomes a lot easier. But what that means is that there's a significant change in our accounting system because there's no precipitation credits anymore, right? Once we move away from ET, we are looking at just the actual amount of water that was pumped from that well. And that's where all we're gonna focus in on is how much is the actual groundwater pumping. We don't worry about how much it rained, we don't care about how much surface water you delivered or any of those types of things, because basically, you know, everything's gonna be based on how much groundwater is actually taken out of the ground. That's been the fundamental issue on Sigma this whole time, right? Is we've been estimating your groundwater pumping based on rain, your surface water deliveries, and your irrigation efficiencies, all of which we've estimated. And frankly, you know, irrigation efficiency, we just assumed if you're in a certain crop, we just put a blanket value across the entire GSA. So it didn't depend, if you were better than someone else, we just had used a one value number across for everybody. Now it's gonna focus on exactly how much groundwater is coming out of your individual well. And that's what we're gonna focus in on.
So you got one number on efficiency for every irrigation method, or one number for each method?
One number, we use one irrigation efficiency currently used
Across the board?
for the type of crop. So if you were an orchard, we have one number regardless of how you're actually operating. And if you're in row crops, we have a slightly lower number.
Sure. And your goal is to adjust it for each
So
landowner?
the idea here is once we switch to meters, we eliminate that whole issue altogether.
Yep.
And it's strictly based on how
You
much
just
you're
got the
pumping.
number.
Yeah,
I got it.
yeah. So that's the real gist of SGMA. Right now, we're actually focused on how much groundwater extraction is taking place. And again, people that are exempt from the policy, you know, are the individual, de minimis users, domestics, people that are pumping less than 2 acre-feet a year, we're leaving them alone. Okay, so that's the one big change. If you all have this document in front of you, I'm gonna ask you to just quickly to switch to page 2. I'm hoping that folks on everybody got emailed a copy?
Yes.
Yeah. If you look, right above item 4, which is definitions, right above it, it has the 5 new categories, or the 5 remaining categories, which is the native yield allocation, and any carryover, which we're gonna talk about in just a second. Landowner developed credits. We have a mitigation credit for Angiola, which only applies to them. Your tier 1 overdraft transitional allocation, and then tier 2. So very similar to what we've seen so far, with the big difference being the precipitation credit has been removed. And then the idea here is this is the default priority of use. However, you can switch your landowner credit, which is item number 2, with item number 4, which is your transitional pumping. So if you opt to use item number 4 first, that water, you don't have to use your credit. We won't automatically default and use your credit if you tell us that's how you want to change it. So very similar to what you see now, that hasn't changed, but I just want to make sure I bring that back to everybody's attention. All right? Okay, then eligibility for native yield. Oh, I should take a minute to talk about native yield. The previous document referred to everything as sustainable yield. The subbasin is using the term native yield because the native yield is the value that everybody gets peanut butter spread of water for every acre of land. That value is now 0.22. It's a little bit higher than what it was previously. Sustainable yield, though, if you are, for example, if you have credits from groundwater losses from imported water you bring in, that could raise your sustainable yield. So the sustainable yield for different people is going to be different. We're going to talk everything in terms of native yield. Okay.
How do you know which sustainable yield number you're allocated?
We're not allocating a sustainable yield number, Brandon. If you had, I think it's more a concept. If you had delivered water, that would make you more sustainable. Your sustainable yield would change, but it's not something we're allocating.
So Brent, just to build on what Deanna said, there were, in the coordination agreement, there were only certain imported waters that were specifically called out, and those none of those applied to Tri-County. It was Delama Early Mart and Lower Tule and others that have Bryant Water and other things that were specifically called out in that coordination agreement. So that was one of the reasons that they made the change. And from our standpoint, we're going to be talking about native yield, and that's that NY value that you see on the screen.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So who's eligible for native yield and the tier 1 transitional water? That has not changed at all. So what we basically said was everybody is eligible for native yield. That's the peanut butter spread that I've talked about a few times. And then on transitional water, that hasn't changed, and that's the 2018 Land IQ crop data that we use. So if you were currently getting transitional water, you will continue to get transitional water in the future. Okay?
Until
The transitional water will continue to reduce over time until 2040. Okay, the rest of page 2 and page 3 are some definitions. For the most part, these definitions have not changed. And I would be happy to also give you guys a red line version. I wanted to give you a clean version for today, but we can also post online on the website a red line version that shows you, you know, every single change that we did make to the document. Again, the civil penalties are not changing. Oh, I know, 4.3. That's carryover. Carryover specifically is in regards to native yield. Your native yield allocation is 0.2 on an annual basis. It's on page 2, 4.3.
Page 2, oh, wait, backwards. Okay, oh, yeah.
4.3,
Okay,
yeah.
sorry.
The definition for carryover, it specifically relates to the native yield. So you get 0.22, and let's just say we have a wet year. In a wet year situation, if you don't use your native yield, then that rolls over to the next year. So that is the one thing that you can carry over, or, you know, if you fallow your land for 1 year or whatever, you don't lose your native yield, that just rolls over to the next. So in your accounting program, if you got 0.22 the next year, you'd have another 0.22, so you'd have 0.44 in your account for native yield. And if you don't use it the following year, you'd have another 0.22 acre feet.
But that use is not, you can't switch it, that's what comes out of your account first.
Comes out of your account first, yes. Native yield will always come out of your account first when you have turned your wells back on.
That, yeah, I mean, that would mean that you wouldn't do any pumping whatsoever
Yeah.
that year.
Yeah.
But then you said it does retire after 5 years?
That's the new change. And that's exactly what I was going to, it does retire after 5 years.
So like, year 1 is gone in year 6 if you haven't used it?
Yeah.
2 to 7?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
On a
not like
rolling-
a 5-year block.
No,
It
that's not a
disappears.
5-year block.
It's a rolling average.
Yeah.
It's a rolling
Oh,
average,
gotcha.
yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, it's on a rolling basis, not a rolling average.
Rolling basis.
Yeah, yes, it's on a rolling basis. So like Jay just said, year 1 retires in year 6. You don't, and then year 2 would retire in year 7, that type of thing.
Yeah. The program will be automatically
Yes, yeah.
pulling off the oldest for.
Okay. Yeah. So, those are, I mean, that's, again, all of this is draft, right? This is all here for your comment, you guys to consider, think about, see what you like, what you don't like.
I don't know if there's much to like.
All right, maybe,
That's a pretty short list.
I know.
yeah, let me maybe.
Be careful what you say, Mary.
Yeah, I gotta rephrase that.
Which you dislike and dislike worse.
Yeah, there you go. What you can live with and what you can't live with, how about that?
I don't think.
Be very careful what you say, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so, number 3 there is on our approach. So let me keep going through the document. As I said, pages 2 and 3, lots of definitions. For the most part, those have not changed. The eligibility has not changed. Then we get onto page 4, which is the procedures. Determination of 5.1, determination of native yield allocation. And again, those native yields allocation is allotted yearly, and you will be allowed to carry that over. 5.13 in the yellow says placeholder for out of GSA transfers, how we're gonna handle that, and we're still, Dan and I are still having some discussions on how we want to, what we want to allow for that, and and what we wanna write there, so you will obviously see that 5.13. If you have ideas on what you think, you are allowed to transfer native yield within Tri-County, but our initial thinking is that we're not gonna allow any transfers outside of the GSA boundaries. So that's our initial discussions.
Are there other GSAs that are allowing transfers in?
Not of the native yield.
Yeah, from my perspective, you could transfer out, but it's gonna be hard to transfer in, because that would,
Yeah.
you know, precipitate additional pumping, which
Sure.
is kind of the opposite of what we're doing. But, you know, we may get, so the reason we haven't, one of the reasons we haven't had any transfers, say, between Pixley and Tri-County, is we're accounting for things differently currently, right? They're using the consumptive basis, we're using an acre-foot basis. All of that area at some point looks to be now going to be metered to Pixley. So maybe we get to a closer to apples and apples situation, and we can facilitate some transfers, but ultimately, from my perspective, transfers into Tri-County, into areas of subsidence where we're looking at this, once we go to the management plan, I don't see a lot of transfers coming in. Unless areas become sustainable in the future and we're not seeing the subsidence issues, which every place in Tri-County has some subsidence right now, so.
Right.
It's just, it's difficult. I don't wanna give people the impression that, oh, sure, as soon as I can clear something up with, you know, Pixley or somebody else, then we're gonna be able to transfer a lot of credits in, because that would just exacerbate
That's just
the
related to
problem.
native yield.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, there's some different things in native yield that, anyway, we'll talk about that with the management plan, but so far, we haven't had any transfer. I think there have been some transfers between Eastern Tule and maybe Sausalito, or I don't really know for certain, but I know there were some transfers in that area. But, you know, things that are not hydrogeologically connected, it's gonna be hard to transfer between those areas, and I think we're just gonna run into some problems. Now, I'm willing to study those issues and come up with areas that can transfer to one another. Tri-County would be 100% for that, but I don't know how that looks yet with the other GSAs.
But you can transfer native yield within the Tri-County area.
So I think this has been brought up before too, but like all this land that's not being used, you know, that's just wilderness, is there any native yield on that we can grab?
There is native yield on those lands, and that's been one of our little bit of.
Oh, okay, so the federal government land has native yield, but they are not gonna, I don't believe they're gonna sell it, so it's not really available for transfer. State lands they don't have an allocation, they're not participating, so those are kind of, like, I believe like the Allensworth Ecological Preserve, those areas don't have an allocation at all.
So far, BLM has agreed to leave their water in the ground except for about 500 acre feet they use for the wetlands. Endangered species.
You want to put a positive spin on that, and I know it's a little bit difficult to think of it in that term, but all of that water that's left in the ground should stabilize water levels. The more that's left there, the more stable we should become over time. And if we become more stable and we see less subsidence and the water level stabilize, then, you know, hopefully we can operate at least under the allocation program. But we're really looking at stabilizing these levels.
Well, the million-dollar question is, how fast do water levels stabilize?
That's a good question.
And how fast does subsidence start or stop? Is it a 20-year process or a 20-day?
I will,
That for me is
it's a good question.
undetermined.
And it's undetermined in specific areas, but we did see in 2023 in areas that turned off the pumps, they had even slight uplift. So it can stop pretty quickly, at least in some areas, if the pumps aren't on. And so that was that was the one time we had a chance to really see what would happen if things went off, and it did. Silence, was pretty well eradicated during that time period in the areas that weren't pumping.
So after that wet year and subsequent year after that was pretty good too. Because I don't think we've ever talked about that again, what the actual outcome was of those 2 years, how it, what did it do to our, do you guys know? I mean, did it help? Or are we still back on the same trajectory as we were before?
No, Martin, the rate of subsidence, and I'm talking, not everything is equal, but the rate of subsidence in the areas that turned off the pumps, definitely you could see slow down tremendously. In other areas, the pumping didn't change as much, and there was some subsidence, not at the kind of 2015 rate, but there was some subsidence. When you look at the map for last water year for subsidence, you see some subsidence in portions of Tri-County. And then you're right, it was a relatively good year in terms of water deliveries and things of that nature.
But did they ever come up with an actual acre-foot value of what was saved in those 2 years or in that year?
Yeah, in the annual report for 2023, it'll tell you what increase in storage was.
Yeah.
We had an increase that
Yeah.
year,
Absolutely.
but as soon as you get out of that year, it goes back the other
So
way.
now it's starting to
Yeah.
go already?
Do you have graphs or numbers by
Absolutely.
area on
Yep.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can show you by GSA, Jay, it's in the last year's annual report,
Okay,
so it's already done. We literally could, I'll get you that, as soon as we're done here.
perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
send one to me too, I'd like
Yeah.
to see it.
Is the annual report on the website, or do we have to go to the DWR?
It's not on our website.
Okay. Also on the portal, on the Sigma portal, you can go and see everybody's annual reports. And so you can, it's a little bit tricky, but it's on there, but we can send it out too.
When you get the link to ours, and Mark, what we'll do is, I'll give you a little breakdown on exactly how much, change in storage was positive for Tri-County.
Okay.
And you can literally take that number divided by the acres of Tri-County that are in production, and say, or then across the entire Tri-County, and say, this is how much each acre. But the other thing, this year's report, which is the last water year that we just finished, which will be completed here, next month, it will then show you how much that has changed. So if we had this much positive, you'll see this year it's gone down.
That's the annual report, or is
Yes, annual
it
report, yeah.
October 1 to September 30?
Yes.
Those are the months?
Yes.
Yes.
It's not January, December?
No.
Okay.
No, we do it on the water year,
Got it.
because the most important thing to us, Jay, is the surface water deliveries. That is, it's not the rainfall or anything like that, it really is about those surface water deliveries. And that occurs in that growing season. Okay, sorry, I lost my train of thought here. We were on section 5, which is the determination of native yield. We talked about 5.14, we talked about transfers, and again, very similar language in 5.15 that you'll see about, having to comply and get approval from Tri-County to the GSA for any transfers. 5.2 is landowner developed credits. Landowner developed credits, similar to last time, are going to be in compliance with our groundwater recharge policy,
It'll be updated.
which will be updated, yes. The policy does very clearly state how much, the leave behind will be, things of that nature. Again, there's some discussion about transfers, but again, I would encourage you, the recharge policy is going to really dictate the groundwater credits, the landowner developed credits. Now, if you develop credits some other way, you have come back with some other ideas that are not covered in the recharge policy, let's talk and let's figure out a way to get you those credits. Okay, transitional pumping. Again, similar to what we had last time, transitional pumping will be given to everyone who qualified under the old program for, transitional pumping. It was based on the 2018 Land IQ crop data maps. It is not transferable, and the civil penalty for pumping is $125 an acre foot. That has not changed. Okay. 5.4. Sorry, I didn't want to get too far ahead of everybody. If you're reading through any of this, cumulative pumping limits. So this is where some of the changes now start to occur. The cumulative pumping limits are going to be 7.62 for the next 5 years. 7.62 acre feet per acre for the next 5 years, and I'm going to show you how those were calculated. If you exceed that cumulative allocation for your transitional pumping, then we will be issuing a notice to you that you will not be able to pump more groundwater allocation or any more transitional pumping. You're going to be limited to just your native yield. Okay. In addition to that, we need an annual pumping limit, because we don't want you pumping 7.62 acre feet all in 1 year, right? And what we came up with is a slightly lower than what we currently have, which is 3.2. We lowered that to just 3.0 acre feet as our maximum for 1 year. Okay. That is a value that we're happy to have some discussion on and you know, get some input on what you would like to see as the annual pumping limit. Obviously, the number is going to go down, and obviously you can't pump 3 acre feet if your total is only 7.62, right? So
I guess my biggest question with all this is, you know, per the comments earlier, what's going to get us out of probation? I mean, are you confident that this 3 acre foot number is going to get us out of probation at an annual cap?
So I don't think that the state's going to go down to that nitty-gritty detail, Brandon. I do think the state is looking for the fact that you have an allocation program that's in place and is going to show reduction. And I'm going to walk you through how we're actually going to see some real-life reductions and be able to prove that to the state. And I think the management plan and the inclusion of the management plan are the two things that are going to show them that you are reducing groundwater, you have a way of measuring how much groundwater you're pumping, and you have a plan if there's impacts. I think those are the things that are going to get you out of probation. Now, if this annual pumping limit is here just to ensure that we don't just have one, one of the complaints we got and comments we got back from some of our neighboring GSAs on the last plan, that it wasn't clear on how much you could pump in any 1 year, and they went to, in their presentation to the state, they made the argument that you could pump, the entire amount in 1 year. So this year, in this plan, we're trying to specifically call out that. So again,
the yearly capture was 3.4, right?
yeah, I believe it's 3.4, yeah.
3.4.
So the 7.62, just to clarify, that is different than
That's the transitional value.
this.
What are you pointing at?
He's
Oh.
looking at page 2 of the.
Because right here, you've got 6.52.
6.52, Myron, that's 6.52. The 7.62 includes your native yield.
That's what that is?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. All right.
overdraft groundwater tier 2 pumping, you'll see that the civil penalty there remains the same for the, $500 an acre foot. Okay. So, let's walk, before we get into any of the other sections, I wanna walk you guys through how the, transitional allocation was derived and how we came up with those, pumping limits. Yeah, next slide, please. So, what you see on the screen there, it's the last three, columns, is the output from the coordination agreement, the output from the model that's included in the coordination agreement. Each GSA has a similar type of table, and it tells them how much we want to reduce total pumping down to our sustainable yield values, which you see in the purple on the screen. So we're starting right around 58,000 acre feet pumped and going down to 18,000 acre feet. Right? Of that, roughly 12,000 is native yield, and 45,000 remaining would be the transitional pumping, and that gives us an idea of how much we're reducing transitional pumping down to. Now, the obvious question you're going to ask me is, what's the difference between the 12 and the 18? If we're saying 18 is the total amount that we're allowing pumped, that 6,000 acre feet is the pumping in Angola. So we've got 12,000 native yield, 6,000 in Angola, and we're over to 18,000 pumped acre feet for the entire GSA. And that number reduces, so we're going to give you your transitional pumping in 5-year blocks, but it's based on these values that you see on this on the screen right now, and we're taking that transitional pumping in 5-year blocks only to the lands that are eligible. Okay, so only the folks that are eligible for that, and that's shown on the next slide. So for the next 5 years, 12,000 acre feet of pumping for native yield. Transitional goes from 38 to 25. The next column shows the combined totals, and then the next two columns that say qualified acreage for allocation. Those are the acres that received the native yield. So that 54,000 acres receiving native yield, and then the transitional is only 23,750.
That's the irrigated land.
That's the land that qualified for transitional pumping.
The native is, I thought Troy County was, on the east side was like that was bigger than that, larger.
We are 60-something thousand acres, but.
Some of that is the beautiful,
Yeah, some of that's
Right.
state land, federal land.
and the transitional acres, 23,750, that's everything in the southeast and the Angola Water District area. Right?
Yes. Yes. So
This is only Tule.
this is only two.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure.
This is only
The
two.
Angola's on the, to the side,
Yeah.
So keep in mind, since we reduce the lands receiving the native yield, that helps us increase the native yield value a little bit, right? Because there's less lands that are qualifying for native yield. So everybody got a little bit more. It's still 12,000 acre feet. If we had included everybody, it'd still be 12,000. You'd just get less native yield.
Which land was excluded?
The state lands and things of that nature.
Okay.
So 0.22 native yield, the transitional is 1.6 for 2026. and that gives us a total of 1.82. Now, the native you'll get every year. The transitional you'll get as a 5-year block with the pumping restriction of the total amount that you can pump in any 1 year and the total amount that you can pump over the 5 years. We talked about doing it more on a year-to-year basis, but we came to obvious conclusion very quickly that, you know, giving you the 5-year block, it allows you the maximum flexibility. There's a wet year, there's a dry year, or excuse me, there's a wet year in that 5-year period, then maybe your transitional is not used as much, and you have more transitional to use in future years.
So just interpreting, you're going from 8.2 to 1.22. I'm guessing the next 5-year block will be to 0.62 in 2040.
Yeah, you're down to just the sustainable
Zero
yield.
transitional.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, zero transitional, yeah, that's right, Jay. Yeah.
Sorry, it was a little hard to hear. Could you elaborate on the transitional qualified acreage?
Yeah, so the transitional qualified acreage, Brandon, is essentially everyone who was in production in 2018. That's what we used for the existing program. And so if you were in the existing program, the current allocations, and you're getting a tier 1 allocation, the transitional allocation, you're going to receive it in the future as well. Was that your question? Did I miss it?
Yep. No, that's
Okay.
perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
What do you think the farmed acreage is today? Is it still 23,750 or is it less
It's less.
It's less.
by?
We have that data.
I'm getting ready to, in fact, I wrote it down over here, we have to submit our, management actions and projects that happened last year for the annual report, and one of those things that we're gonna submit is how many lands went fallow in the last year. So I do have lands that people have followed in the last couple of years, and I just don't have a report on that right now, but good. And that, you know, a good point. It may be something that after the first 5 years here, that we reassess how many lands are fallow, and maybe, you know, that transitional number could change.
Yeah.
It's possible.
So one of the things we are looking at is, you know, obviously is that total groundwater pumping. And if people are not using their groundwater, their transitional values because they fallow their lands, then maybe we need to make sure, because we're still not gonna exceed our total value, right?
Right.
And give each of you a little bit more that are still in production, a little bit more transitional. So we'd have to, you know, we
But
could.
it wouldn't be a lot.
It wouldn't be a lot, no, it wouldn't be a lot.
It's gonna be,
Not gonna be 2 feet?
no, it's gonna be pretty small.
0.2 feet?
Yeah. Okay. Let me keep going, next slide. So a lot of what we just said, this is a nice little summary, you know, 0.22 acre feet every year annually. For that first 5 year, this is on the Tule side, the transitional pumping reduces from 1.6 to 1.05. Approximately 6.57 acre feet over those 5-year periods. We talked about landowner developed credits, as I already said, that in accordance with the recharge policy, and as Deanna mentioned, we're gonna update the recharge policy. And one of the updates that we're very seriously considering is that the credit will go to the zone that's being recharged. And then the last thing again is just to remind everybody that the Angela has a credit of 6,000 acre feet annually as well. Let's talk a little bit about the fact that I haven't mentioned in any of my discussions which zone you can pump out of. So your allocation. And we are going to allow you to pump your allocation in totality in whatever zone that you choose to pump in. So if all your wells are completed below the clay, you can pump your allocation in below the clay. If your wells are completed above, you can pump it above. If you're pumping below the clay and you decide, hey, I've now drilled some new wells and I can move those, I can move my pumping to above the clay, it doesn't increase your allocation. Your allocation is going to be a total number. But all of it would transfer to whatever zone you would like to pump from.
That's good news.
Well, that's,
Yeah.
that's somewhat good news. That's the allocation policy, but that is not the subsidence management. So when you go to the subsidence management policy, there is the triggers that would move from lower to upper.
Yeah.
To
So all these numbers mean
Well-
nothing. It may
If
diminish
subsidence-
minimum threshold.
Yeah, if subsidence continues, we're going to talk about that next.
That's okay.
Yeah.
How does your
Go ahead, Brad.
allocation may not change, but it's continuing to ramp down. So if a landowner were somehow able to pump from the upper aquifer, I mean, what's the contribution to subsidence from the upper aquifer? How, I'm
So
sure
we
there's.
have-
Go ahead.
Yeah, we've asked Tom Harder that question quite a bit, because that question has come up, as you can imagine, in every conversation about subsidence. And Tom has very clearly stated that the subsidence contribution from the upper aquifer is substantially less, but there is still some contribution from the upper in his calculations. And so the advantage to everybody, or to those of you that move to the upper, is you would not be subject to the pumping restrictions that I'm going to talk about in a little bit if subsidence continues at the rate. And if your contribution to subsidence is substantially less, that gives you a lot more years of pumping before a subsidence value would shut you off.
But at the end of the day, you're stuck with native yield. Unless you
Yeah.
hit your minimum threshold, but even then, you'd be stuck with native yield allowance from the upper aquifer if you're
Yeah.
able. My understanding of the upper aquifer is it has elastic subsidence, though. Is that versus that's major differentiation between the lower and the upper, right? The lower aquifer has the inelastic subsidence or causes inelastic subsidence, and the upper is more on the elastic side of things.
So it's not a one-to-one, and it's not quite that clean, Brandon. It very much depends on the very specific geology of the area. And so in general, what you're saying is correct, but it's not correct at every single location across the Tule subbasin.
Sure, and I understand that. I think I just guess food for thought, though, is if a landowner was able to figure out a way to actually bring in, whether it be floodwater or some sort of surface water supply, it's limited,
Yeah.
and recharge the upper aquifer, let's call it, and they took the time and the money to put in an upper aquifer well, and through recharge can actually access more water from the upper aquifer. Should they not have the opportunity to pull from that?
Yeah, and certainly any project that you're, like the one you described, would give you landowner developed credits. And
Okay,
those credits would allow you to those credits would be on top of the allocations that we've talked about.
got it. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Stacy, next slide. How are we doing time-wise? Sorry. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about exceedances. This is, again, just related to the groundwater allocation policy. If you exceed, very similar to what we have currently, if you exceed the transitional pumping, you're into the tier 2 penalties. If you exceed your total pumping, then we are looking to cease pumping from the lower aquifer. We already talked about aquifer allocations, you can pump up to your allocated limits in either aquifer. Do it in one, you can do it in the other, or you can do a mixture of both, but you cannot exceed the total amount of groundwater extracted.
And the enforcement's gonna be, $500 penalty. And a letter. That's right?
Yes.
And then it's up to the landowner.
Yeah, we'll have to figure out enforcement and.
I have to talk with Deanna, what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to lean it.
Yeah.
There might be,
It's the current-
there might be trailing pumping for a while.
It's the current process right now.
Right.
Okay, if groundwater pumping results in impacts, so you're pumping within your allocation, but we're still seeing impacts, then the groundwater, subsidence management plan, the water quality, or the management plans will kick into effect, and those will be different, and they will have their own set of rules that will override the allocation policy. Because there's impacts occurring, and we need to address those impacts. That's gonna be a big part of getting us approved by the state, is showing that we are addressing impacts. And I'm gonna go into some of the changes to the subsidence policy here in just a bit. Just to close out the allocation, you know, we talked about, 6 is meter, 7 is penalties, 8 is enforcement, and 9, of course, is actions against TWA, but, none of those have changed from the existing policy. We are looking for, you know, to keep those all the same, and I already mentioned the fact that the dollar amounts of the civil penalties have not changed at all. So, before we leave the allocation policy, this is the draft. If Deanna and I, you know, we were talking about that March 6th board meeting, which means that this group is only gonna meet one more time before then. So we are really looking for your input, your thoughts, your ideas, the things that you would like to see modified in this, draft of the allocation policy, before the February 26th, or certainly by the 26th, meeting, so that we can get everybody's comments, we can finalize it, and we can get you a final version of it before the board approves, or it goes to the board for potential approval on the March 6th meeting. So things to think about, again, what I would emphasize to you guys, make sure that you're clear on what credits you're gonna be able to get. Make sure that you're clear on the fact of how the allocation was determined. You can see the pumping limits as we start to reduce, and again, I'm gonna emphasize the fact that, all of the GSAs have that in place too, it's not just us. And if you have questions on that, and then of course, you know, what the next 5-year allocations are gonna look like.
Real quick, Amir, so this year, we're measuring ET.
Yes.
And it's on the last year of the previous 5-year policy.
Yes.
All this stuff we talked about today is gonna be implemented 26 to 30?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right.
And measuring by pumping instead of ET, rainfall,
Yeah.
all the stuff we talked about.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay. I'm getting used to having a lot of meetings with a lot of unhappy people looking at me.
These meetings are, they just get worse all the time.
It just gets worse. Okay. Now, next slide. The subsidence management plan. So we talked about the fact that, you know, if you are pumping your allocation and there's no impacts in the area that you're in, then you continue to run and pump your allocations. No problem. But if we do start to see impacts, then the subsidence management plan in particular, and there's gonna be one for water quality and one for water levels, But I want to talk specifically about this. We talked about this at the last meeting. There was a lot of discussion in the last meeting about the MT. And I know none of you like the MT that's being proposed. And that was based on some of the information from Delana Earlymart and others. So we went ahead, and we're still continuing to have those conversations. Those are separate. And I know none of you like the MT, but the management plan does not set the MT, just to be 100% clear. The management plan just says, hey, there's an MT value. If we're approaching that MT value, what steps are we going to take? And as Deanna said, the reason that Lower Tule and Pixley potentially could get out of the having to report their any fees to the state is because they committed to having a subsidence management plan. That is the number one concern that the state had in our area, is how we're going to get subsidence under control. I know I'm saying something you already know, but I just wanted to reiterate that.
You just didn't want us to badger you on it again, Amir. That's all.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right, Brenda. That's exactly right.
I get it. Real
Go
quick.
ahead.
The one thing and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but I don't recall, was there like an early action plan or some sort of trigger that initiated an investigation before?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
before the 50%. What's the number again? It's like 33% or something.
I think you got a third, is that right?
Yeah.
Amir?
Yeah.
Yeah, Amir has 25%,
25%.
but I don't think so. I think it's,
Yeah, we're going to raise that.
that's a little low. I'd be investigating everybody
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well, and I think just, I don't know how that ties in necessarily to, as you mentioned, some of these zones are already going to be at that 50% if we use the current minimum threshold levels. How do we buy us some time to still investigate to see, hey, are these wells or is this particular property within the zone a contributor to the subsidence or major contributor? How is that going to look?
So, yeah, I think we need to push that percent back personally. I'm more on the 45, 50%, then that
So
triggers
you-
the investigation.
You want the high risk early management to be at 50?
Maybe 40, maybe 45, but 25 is too,
Okay, so
that just puts, but then you have, these things could go very quickly, but
yeah,
between
Well-
45 and 75,
yeah.
I
So
don't-
hold that thought.
Okay, let's talk about
Okay.
the cutback before you go to
Yeah.
study.
Yeah. So hold that thought just for a second. So the major change to this document that I made was what happened at the corrective, item 4, which is the corrective subsidence management plan, or management order, excuse me. And the discussion that Dan and I had was we should match what Lower Tule and Pixley had. So I went through and I changed it to match exactly what Lower Tule and Pixley has in their plan. And basically, what you see on the screen is mostly that. There's one significant change, which is on the 75%, they essentially say no pumping from the lower aquifer. I make it clear that we can continue pumping from the upper aquifer. Okay, so we're not turning off you're not saying no pumping at 75% of the MT. We're just saying that you have to move from the lower to the upper at 75%. So the big changes, again, and this is actually a little bit more restrictive, is that the 50%, we have no tier 1 allocation. You can't pump your tier 1 anymore. And then no pumping of recharge credits in that area. The change in the 75 is, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I think my 2 cents just on the transitional is maybe we're opening a can of worms here, but if you were to keep that no pumping of tier 1 transition allocation specific to the lower,
Yeah, to the
initially,
lower.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
good
not
point.
just
Very
get
good
rid of
point.
it generally, yeah.
And I would just say the same for the recharge, because I think the recharge is really, it went to the upper,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right? We didn't,
Yeah.
we didn't recharge the lower,
right.
so I don't know why we're taking the recharge credit off the table, because
Yeah,
We're talking about
I agree with that. I actually wrote that down in here.
if you can pump from the upper, the recharge went to the upper.
Yeah, we'll specify that those two are
You get
for
that below
lower
the plate.
only.
Yeah, that's for lower only.
Yeah,
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good, very good point. Both of those,
because you wanna incentivize recharge, but, and then you wanna focus your pumping where it's gonna be going, like Brandon is saying, if we do a project, you recharge an area, you wanna be able to pump that water back,
yeah,
right, to that extent. No problem.
right. So we'll specify that the 50% is strictly on the lower. 75% already says no pumping from the lower aquifer, but you can continue pumping from the upper. And that'll obviously be true from the 50, but I just wanna make sure that people are clear that you can, even at 75%, you can do that. And then at 100%, no pumping from wells that are contributing to subsidence. Obviously, that's,
How do you determine that?
yeah, that's gonna be a very, very tricky and complicated discussion. So we do, separate from all of this, we have some proposals that we're generally putting together for Deanna to try and develop some of those type of information, so that we have some information going before this plan is fully implemented, and we have to go there. We'll have some of that data ready to go, of how much contribution from each aquifer is occurring, in general to subsidence. So go ahead, Brandon.
I wanted to call out, if you change the 50% category to just, referencing the lower aquifer, I think it
Yeah.
makes the 75% portion redundant at that point. I mean, at least the way I'm thinking.
So at 50% of the lower, you can still pump native yield out of the lower.
Okay, so maybe, okay, that helps,
Yeah, you can still pump native yield out of the lower,
at 50%,
yeah, but
okay,
at 75, we're basically saying, hey, we're stopping all pumping in the lower.
okay, that works.
So, Steve, your question was very good, because I looked at Pixley's policy when I was rewriting this, and I had the exact same thought as, how are you gonna determine exactly how much each well is contributing to subsidence? And that's going to be, so we are looking at some additional scope of work separate from all of this to help, start to quantify some of those values.
Their plan, if you hit the study, I mean, if you're in that, but whatever the trigger is, they're asking all the growers to register the wells.
Yes,
So they'll know what the wells are pumping from,
I think
theoretically.
they also passed, by May, all wells have to be registered now. Or at least 60.
Okay.
So they're moving forward with well registry everywhere.
Yeah.
I think it's only if they're considered high-risk zone currently, though.
Unless if they passed another one that said by May. Maybe not. I don't know.
Lower Tule, all of Lower Tule is now considered high-risk zone. We just got that lovely notice earlier this week.
Yeah, that's gonna be the same with Tri-County, Brandon. I mean, we're already hitting these numbers in most places.
Yeah.
There's also some discussion over there looking at upper aquifer recharge and the impacts on subsidence in the lower aquifer. So that's an interesting discussion that's just been coming up with some of the farmers, and I don't know how you would measure that either.
It increases it or decreases it?
Increases because of the weight.
The weight? Now recharge is a bad word too?
Yeah, it's just a discussion to come up
I think
with
that
the farmers.
there's a lot of discussions going on out there because, the initial thought was if we recharge, we can keep pumping from everywhere. And now it's becoming evident that it's not all of the return flow that they wanted and everything's not return flowing to the layer they're pumping out of. So
Right.
that's what's precipitating some of those discussions.
The precip credits were given, you could, you know, and clearly those were going to the upper aquifer,
Yeah.
and people were still pumping from the lower and using precip credits, and there were a lot of things that we found problematic. Let me take a step back, though. If at 50%, we're saying that you're losing your tier one transitional, at what point should we issue the high risk?
Which is not say losing, we're moving it.
Moving it, okay, moving it, yeah. We're limiting the,
Limiting access
yeah,
to the upper.
yeah. So if that happens at 50%, working backwards, when should we consider something high risk? That's why I ended up at 25%. That, you know, the comment that Deanna made and Brandon made is that already triggers everybody, right? Pretty close, that just about.
What is Pixie and Lower Two against the board? What's in their policy? Triggers the high risk over there.
50%, I think 50% is high risk, but they initiate an early action plan at, maybe that's where the 33% number comes from.
Let's say 49.
Since they're out there talking to the board, I mean, it's already gonna, I mean,
Yes.
they're already gonna be looking at that as one of the plans, so I don't know, it's gonna be hard for us to deviate a whole lot.
It's going to be very difficult.
Right.
That was my
If they want
discussion with the
the
mayor. We may as well,
basin to be the same, it's
Yes.
gonna be hard to come
Yeah.
up with a different
Yeah.
threshold for, you know, looking
So,
further on these grids.
we should follow it pretty closely, because the state,
They're talking to the state every week.
is gonna
Yeah,
come
yeah,
back
they're
and
talking
say,
weekly.
okay, and they're gonna expect it out of the rest of us.
Yeah.
sure.
If
Yeah.
that, if, you know, if they're willing to do it, then they're gonna expect the rest of us to comply with the same.
How does each landowner know where the Corcoran clay is and how thick it is and all that business?
It's a good question, because we have, I
The
mean,
maps,
we have maps and things, and, you know, we could produce those, but
Are they
from my,
1950s, or they?
no,
no,
they're
we've
pretty-
done quite a bit over.
yeah, but
Okay.
they use data going as far back as we can get it, which basically means that people drilled wells, and then you look at those well logs, and you can say, okay, this well at this location has the Corcoran clay at this depth.
It's solid clay then, or is it clay and sand, or how do they, I've seen these well logs, they got all sorts of
Yeah.
descriptions on them.
Yeah,
Depends who's writing this stuff down.
yeah, it does, and so you have to do some, the USGS, the United States Geological Survey has some maps, and then there were some very specific, cross-sections developed by Ken Schmidt when he did the, 2020 document.
Oh,
And so Ken put together some very good cross-sections of where the Corcoran clay is in our area.
okay.
So I have two wells that are a quarter mile apart, and I was looking at the logs the other day.
Yeah.
One of them has kind of it's a clay, you could see that it's clay, and then they kind of have about 100-foot layer,
It's clay.
but then the other one
You don't
is
see
within
it.
a quarter, I mean, and then there's maybe a 25 to 50-foot deal that,
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden I have another sand streak, right?
yeah,
And then,
yeah.
so I don't know what,
So
Really,
you're off to
sure.
the east, right, Myron, if I remember right, your property's towards the east side of Tri-County?
no, I mean, the east side? Yeah, we're right on the boundary.
We're going our-
You're doing early mark, right? So the clay does start to pinch out in that area, and that's.
So I thought it was more towards, like,
It's not consistent, I mean, like, the whole clay doesn't come to one stop, right? And so you start to see stringers of the clay as well as you start moving further east. Like, Galena Early Mark definitely has some clay and, you know, zones in it. But they're not the 100-foot continuous or even bigger that we see, in other parts of the.
okay, I thought you'd have to be like where the Frank Canal is, sort of, to where it kind of starts petering out. I thought that's what you get.
It starts
to the
petering out a little
43.
bit before then, but
We're 99.
yeah, but it doesn't, you know, it's not this hard stop. It also starts to rise a little bit, you'll.
Because I had a hard time saying, okay, where is that clay?
Yeah,
It could, is that something you could provide us? I mean, especially, you know,
cross section?
no, well, yeah, the maps that kind of show the cork and clay layer. You know,
Yeah,
my other, you know, the issue landowners are gonna have to face with these corrective management decisions is what do you do with your well that's perfed above and below? Where do you perf it, you know?
yeah, right.
So, I mean, I'd rather start doing that sooner than later, being that we're probably already at 50%.
Yeah, we'll provide you guys, or we'll make available on the website or something, all of the maps, USGS maps, the cross sections that Ken prepared previously, and those are all published information.
This is Sebastian Silvera. I have one question about, and I don't know if you spoke to this or if you're going to speak to it, but what would the investigation look like in a zone that has, across some percentage thresholds? Like what, if there isn't anything in place, but what maybe could that potentially look like? Would, you know, everybody in the zone come in for a meeting and I don't know.
So,
What that question is.
Sebastian, that's a great question, and I've been thinking about this a lot. And I would think that the first thing that we would want to do is review all the pumping data that's been provided in the
Well registry.
and the well registry would, well, actually, Deanna's right, well registry first, and make sure that we're looking at you know, all the lands, and we know that everybody's got their well registered. So if we can clearly see we got some land in production, we don't see a well, we'd want to talk to that landowner and say, hey, are you providing water to this property from some other location, or did you just forget to include a well? So we want to make sure the well registry is complete in that area first. And again, you know, we're talking 2 sections by 2 sections, right? And then secondly, we'd want to then look at actual pumping data and say, okay, what's actually occurring on an individual well level in that zone, and how close are they following our allocation policy? Where are those wells drilled? Are they all below the clay? What do we know about the clay in that area? And is there a conversation that we can have with is there 1 or 2 landowners that may be exceeding their allocation? Is there something we can do to address that? And then look at, you know, like I said, the geology and the thickness of the clay, and say, okay, is there something else occurring here that is unique to this one area? I will say that if you look at the subsidence maps, it doesn't vary from what we're going to call a grid to grid. You can see subsidence, it kind of occurs in general areas, and that would mean that multiple grids would probably be affected if subsidence continued at the same rate that it's occurring today. So it wouldn't just be one grid, it would probably be, you know, 4 or 5 grids, or that are, you know, close together that would be affected, or 3 or 4, or something to that effect. And then we try to say, you know, is there something else that we can do as a GSA? That could mean, let's say the impact of subsidence in that grid is a levee system, just for the sake of discussion, right? Do we look at trying to fix and mitigate the problem so that we can say, look, this problem now is fixed. It's okay if we, you know, we have much subsidence. But at the end of the day, the state still wants to see subsidence come to 0. So mitigation by itself is not the solution. We're going to have to get the pumping under control of what's the root cause of the subsidence.
There's going to be very little time for mitigation,
Yeah.
unfortunately. I mean, if you just look at the rate of subsidence and MPs, and we're still reviewing the MPs in the southeast area. Those are not set by any means. But even if they move, and again, they're only going to move maybe at the most a foot more. You look at the rate of subsidence, I mean, I wish that we could say, oh, yeah, if we could mitigate these problems, we could continue, but the minimum threshold is still gonna be the minimum threshold at some point.
Yeah, that's
Is-
the biggest factor, in the equation.
Yes,
Yes, how do we do that equitably across Bixley, Lower Tule, Tri-Counties, the whole enchilada?
yes.
I mean, some people got 7, some got 2 or 2.5.
Yeah.
That's, in my book, the biggest problem. It's not equitable.
Yeah.
Problem we're looking at it, definitely.
Brandon, were
Well-
you gonna add something?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going, if, especially considering the fact that, these other zones that have currently a wider spread between their subsidence and their minimum threshold that are still going to be allowed to pump. I mean, in theory, right? They're going to be able to pump more longer from the lower aquifer and further contribute to subsidence. Yet, I mean, what's the sphere of influence, or, isn't that what's called sphere of influence or cone of influence from subsidence? What's the stretch on that? 2 miles, 6 miles, 10 miles? And it's going to continue to impact zones outside of where the pumping is still continuing. And I mean, I guess not to pick on anybody here, but if there's 6,000 acre foot credited to Angiola, are they still under these same minimum threshold triggers?
Well, the intent would be to pass the allocation policy and the minimum threshold, and the, management actions for the entire GSA. That's the intent.
Yeah, so, and that's fine. So I mean, in theory, then just to, paint the picture, that 6,000 acre foot would move from the lower at some point if they hit their 50%.
Yeah, it would,
Yeah.
yes, it's the end of the same management
Yes.
action plan.
Yeah. Yeah, they definitely would be under the same management action plan. Because the
Just,
land
I guess
surrounding it,
if obviously that region in particular has a much higher minimum threshold, if they're allowed to continue pumping that much out of the lower aquifer, how far out is that subsidence going to continue to reach?
Yeah, it's the same, you're talking about the same issue Delana Early Mart has with Southeast Tri-County. Delana Early Mart is saying, you're gonna continue to pump, but your subsidence is reaching into Delana Early Mart and causing our problem.
I think more my point actually would be like the investigation part of it, ensuring that there's some process there, because if this particular landowner in this zone is actually not a major contributor to the subsidence, that it should be fair and equitable. I don't want, I understand your point on, outside boundary lines, but that's where I think the fair and equitable portion comes in, is if, hey, you currently have an higher allocation, yet you're the major contributor to the subsidence, there probably needs to be something in place about that.
No, I don't disagree.
Are they liable to the maximum pumping of 3 acre feet? Or are they, I don't know how big that area is, and it's 6,000 acre feet, and it's 2,000 acres, it's 3, obviously.
yeah, so Jay, they are limited to the pumping total. The well field, so we just gave them.
No acres.
Yeah, it's not based on acreage. It would be based on just, this is how much water you can pump.
But to Brandon's point then, are they gonna pump 6 and cause?
Yeah, that's, yeah, no. So I will tell you, we have literally, in front of me is a draft of a proposal that we have that is specifically to work with Dan and figure out what the potential effects of pumping and on groundwater levels and subsidence within Tri-County and outside of Tri-County, the western portion of Tri-County, and figure out how much pumping is contributing and how far those impacts extend out. So that was a part of a conversation that we've had, and so we're coming up with a plan to specifically answer that before we get into 2026.
Yeah.
So right now, it's that little well field, what, has anybody seen what the subsidence is in that area?
Yes, yes, yeah,
Yes.
yes.
It's,
But-
it's no bigger though than Pixley or
Oh, it's not.
the Lord.
Yeah,
No, it's all,
So,
Pretty
so
similar.
they, even though they're, that confined area's pumping, what are they today? Maybe, they're like 28,000 today, aren't they?
No,
the last couple of years, cause they have the ability to have surface water, last couple of years, they pumped zero, and then
Yeah.
last year, what was it last year?
Yeah.
Cause they're like at 44 right now?
They really do
I mean,
swing
if they-
depending on wet to dry. It swings
Right.
from wet to dry
Right.
heavily, as they're not a consistent pumper in wet years, but regardless, believe me, they have a problem. They have a heavy subsidence area. You know, Pixley and Lower Tule have the same problem.
Yeah, so Myron, just to be clear, Pixie and Lower Tule's hands are not clean around the edge of
Yeah,
the well field.
No, of course.
the pumping,
Yeah, they're planted wall to wall, right? And they're pumping like
But,
crazy.
but they're not us, right?
the well,
Joel-
no.
Joel is in our.
Yeah,
yeah, that's right.
The well
Figure out,
density
yeah.
across the entire sub-basin is a problem.
Yeah.
And the pumping everywhere is contributing, and,
Yeah.
and so, you know, everybody should be contributing to the solution
Yes.
equally. That's what we're trying to get at,
Right.
but it's not easy, right? But that's what we're trying to get at, that everybody will equally
We
work
don't
towards
think,
the solution.
we don't think Galena Early Mark's hands are clean either. They're not a major contributor. There's lots of other people that are pumping way more than they are. Their hands aren't clean either. And, you know, that's part of the discussions that we're having is everyone who's contributing to the impact, and they're not contributing equally, we all understand that, but everyone who's contributing has to make reductions. And is causing part of the impacts and should therefore reduce pumping.
So when we get to native yield, theoretically, subsidence stops,
Yes.
Theoretically.
theoretically. If it occurs in a relatively short time frame.
Right.
But if it's a 20-year effect,
Yeah, the residual
you're never
subsidence,
gonna know.
yeah, there will probably be some residual subsidence, but you know what, Jay, I'd say we focus on stopping the rate of subsidence and then any residual that occurs over the next 20 years. And the state doesn't wanna hear me say that, and they don't like it when we say that, but let's focus on the significant problem, right? And if let's get subsidence under control and then we'll.
Well, at that point, shouldn't the highest subsidence areas have the lowest minimum thresholds? I mean, that's kind of my thought.
It's not though, based on the quilt.
Yes, that's not how it was done.
No, so Brandon, the difference in what you just said and when the quilt is focused on the impacts to infrastructure, which is specifically the Frank Kern Canal. And if you have, as you move eastward toward Frank Kern, you'll see the numbers drop, right? And
Yeah,
then-
but it doesn't address the overall subsidence issue, which to your point is the state's major
Yeah.
concern.
Yeah, I frankly don't have a problem with the MTs that were set up there. I think we should have set them more consistently through the southeast area. The thing you run into in the southeast area is Kern set theirs at 4, Galena Early Mark set theirs at 0, and Alpha wanted 0. I think maybe they're at 3 or 4 now. And so it comes to a coordination problem with your neighbor. You know, the Pixley area, Angela area, you know, I think they feel like, okay, you have maybe Deer Creek running through there, but we can rebuild those borders through this, you know. And frankly, their rate of subsidence is, again, more than what the southeast area has, but, you know, the hope was we kind of all come to the 0 at the same point because they have a much bigger hurdle to slow that rate because the amount of pumping in that area. So those were kind of the factors that went into that, and the southeast area MTs, like I said, are under review. And we're working on that. I think you should expect to see that they are not gonna be where they were. I shouldn't say that exactly, but that's what we're.
That discussion is ongoing.
Ongoing,
So let me
yeah.
ask you a question, so Delano Early Mart, has there been studies on subsidence in that area? Are they at zero?
They set their subsidence rate at
No,
zero.
they said it, but are they at zero
No,
subsidence?
no.
So,
No.
They,
that proves a point that the subsidence is kinda,
they set it at zero, and their statement is that their surrounding neighbors are causing them. That if their surrounding neighbors were sustainable, they would be at zero, all subsidence would stop.
I don't believe that.
I don't.
I mean, right underneath their sinking basins, if they're still sinking, that does not, I'm not causing that. I know that.
That's why we're gonna commission a study that's particular to Tri-County.
And sorry, this is probably just my lack of knowledge here. And Mayor, I don't know if this is in your realm, but is it worth, whether it's you, Mayor, or a separate consultant, to come in and kind of, we're talking about more so the investigation process and impacts of subsidence. Is that who does that? Where does that come into play?
Are you talking about as the management plan goes into effect specifically?
I mean, as far as I know, Thomas Harder's data is the one that's setting these minimum thresholds, setting, and then what is it? The INSAR is providing some data as well, but is there,
right,
other hydrogeologic firms or engineering firms that would help the investigation side of monitoring subsidence at a property level? Does that make sense?
That actual data is what you're talking about, Brandon, on the ground data, and that is exactly what Amir and I are talking about, and what we've been talking to Geosyntex hydrogeologist Bob Anderson, and we're looking at doing an actual data study to look at the specific geological formations of Tri-County, the pumping, where the wells are registered, or where they're located, and we're gonna do a specific study to Tri-County.
Okay, yeah, and the INSAR, that's much more of a very regional scope, right? It's a satellite versus, I'm pretty sure there's ground instruments that could be installed at well sites and things of that sort too.
Yeah, Brent, okay, I get your point now. Yes, the INSAR data does take continuous measurements on the ground, and in addition to that, we do have some data points that we go out and do survey, land surveys on them, topo surveys, and Four Creeks does that, and that data does match up with the INSAR data. You see a very close correlation between the two data sets. So we feel pretty good about the INSAR data and utilizing that, but we do check it with on the ground measurements as well. Was that your question?
Yeah, I think
Did I
so.
misunderstand?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, it was more just, is it you, or is there somebody else that we're bringing in to kind of help with that? And if there's not, should we be looking for somebody, was more my question.
Yeah, we are definitely going to propose a scope of work and a budget to Deanna. We incorporated some of that money in the current budget. When I do the yearly budget to Deanna, we talk about this, and we did anticipate some of this occurring.
Yeah.
And I'm literally looking at a draft of the document sitting here in front of me that I've marked up, and we expect to have this thing to Deanna later this week. Because the plan is to have this data collected and ready to go before the 26th implementation of the pumping allocations. I don't know if we'll have it before September, but we'll have a good chunk of it by September.
Well, what we are gonna need though, and what I've been talking about Bob, is we're gonna need, wells. We're gonna need access to some wells along
Yes,
that border
yes.
with DEID. And so, we're gonna be
Talking, reaching out to some of you in this room and on the call.
data, actual data to do some of that work.
Okay.
All right, Stacy, that was my last slide, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
All right, I lost track of this meeting, I lost control of the meeting.
It is 11:50.
It is 11:50.
Yeah, we're gonna have to wrap up by noon.
Yeah, we gotta wrap up.
Yeah.
I lost my agenda too. I don't think there was anything else
I
on
think that's really it.
Yeah.
What we need is, comments on both of these, drafts, and I think we sent both of these out this morning, right?
Not
the-
the signs, because we weren't sure we were gonna
Yeah, I
get to
didn't
that
see
today.
We'll see that, send that out again as well.
Yeah.
And I know we have a request for the USGS maps and cross-sections for clay layers, which will get out,
And the annual report.
and the annual report. And when do we need the feedback back by?
So, we have another meeting on the 26th.
I'd say at least a week before that
Yeah.
would be.
A week before the 26th, do you have the date?
Be the 19th.
The 19th, thank you, yeah. So by the 19th, it would be nice to have everyone's comments back on both the draft allocation as well as the draft subsidence management plan. Those are the two big ones. Those are the, that's a 600-pound gorilla for this document.
Yeah, I think the subsidence is, it comes back to MT for us, that's what. The allocations are gonna get you to, they mentioned, we're gonna go to sustainable yield.
Yeah.
We just need, and with the huge inequities in the basin, between those who can pump and those who can't. We need a little latitude. The board's gotta understand that there's gotta be some latitude here. Latitude to, basically go out of production.
Yeah.
3/4 or more of the ground go out of production.
Does the state recognize that, maybe that's their goal, that the MTs will take you out much faster than the stated 24 goal soft landing?
Yeah, the state would say that subsidence is causing significant impacts to the region, and that has to be brought under control. And the Department of Water Resources is going to release their best management practices here very soon, and I heard from the Department of Water Resources that it's going to be very restrictive on the subsidence issue.
They also said we got till 2040.
That
The
was,
original,
that
that's the
was,
way I always
that
heard
was
it, right?
our mantra for a long time, that we have till 2040, and we were gonna do, this
Yeah, just
linear.
all these numbers for water.
And the
Yep.
state has not accepted that process. They've said, they were when they came back, when they deemed us inadequate and they came in and we began our meetings with them, they made it very clear that subsidence, the minimum thresholds you set for subsidence are not acceptable. They're going to allow additional damage, and you have to rethink those and change them.
Yeah, that's like setting the speed limit at 75 and getting a ticket for 55. I mean,
It's good.
some sort of analogy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Sigma was adopted with those years, the step down in place, right?
So what
So
they
would
would,
the state coming in after the fact and say, well, sorry, guys,
Change the rules.
what they would say is in the law, that it says we had till 2040, but that you had to avoid significant and unreasonable results.
Yeah.
And subsidence is causing significant and unreasonable results. That's going to be what they're going to stick on.
On the other side, it's causing significant and very detrimental results to the people that are in the business.
What's been
Is
lost,
that not a consideration?
what's been lost is local control and local, determination of what those significant and unreasonable results are. We've lost that somewhere in the conversation, but it's not helpful when you have a whole sub-basin that goes in, and the people in the sub-basin are the ones saying, you're causing the problem and you need to stop. So if we all went in as a locked arm sub-basin and said what we're saying here, you might have a fighting chance. But when you have the Bryant Kern Canal sinking and you have other people in the basin saying, you're causing the problem and it's gotta stop, it makes it very difficult, because they look at us as an entire basin. They're saying, look, your own neighbors in the basin say you're causing these problems. And so it made it very difficult to make some of those.
Well, we're not asking for an exemption, we're asking within reason of what everybody else is doing.
Like I said, I
That's
think
all we're
the
saying,
MTs
and
in the southeast area have to be
critical infrastructure
reconsidered.
is on the east side, I guess, you know, that's where they focus.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the GSA statute, look, gives a lot of deference to GSA, how they interpret and how they manage. Believe me, I'm on the board.
Yes.
We are doing some wonky stuff, right? And it's approved plan, but we're all suing each other. So I'm just saying, I've seen a lot of stuff go on, and I don't care what, I'll take a chapter from our illustrious, manager right here in Portland of this GSA. You know, don't let someone else tell you how to run your GSA. Right? We are here looking at behalf of Tri-County Water Authority
Right.
landowners. And we have to do what's best for landowners here.
Yeah.
And we have latitude, and so I'm just saying, you gotta keep that in mind, you don't wanna end up in a lawsuit.
I think to determine,
And I think the state recognizes that
determination,
too, that if you get pushed too hard, this whole thing could go into gigantic 4 million acres suing each other.
certainly.
Don't wanna see that.
The only other side of that sword is the interim plan. That's really the stick, right? Like, how much do you wanna take a chance to have that interim plan laid upon your GSA? And how long would it take to get out of state control of your wells?
Yeah.
Because once they have control of your
No,
wells,
it's a-
it's probably not going
It's a
to
fine line, I
be
mean,
quick to get out.
we're not asking for the moon, we're just asking to give a little deference, right? Walk that fine line a little bit,
Yeah.
and, give us a little more room to operate, and, you know where we're going, everybody knows where we're going.
Soft landing,
That's all we're
not
asking
off
for.
the cliff.
Okay.
Good luck. We're praying for you.
Let me wrap up for,
And everybody else,
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
just to wrap
Come to
up.
one of our Thule Land Trust meetings and the farmers that are on our board. It gets pretty hot discussions. They're all from Pixley.
Oh, can I just say one thing on just what, because you remind me, can we, because I saw David Valadez was gonna put some legislation in, I don't think it's gonna do for like land retirement, but he's active, I know Eric and Dan Mink probably are, got his ears. Can we talk to,
I will be.
can we lobby
in DC.
David,
Yep.
say, can we get $500 million to help us do some retirement here in Tulare Lake?
I'm gonna be in DC at the end of February,
Not $10 million, give us
and
like $1
I
billion.
Valadez's office is trying to schedule me right now. I have an appointment with Representative Costa. I have an appointment with the Bureau of Reclamation, working on the USDA, so
I've got the
I'm
name.
doing exactly what you're talking about, because that's what we need. We need dollars to fallow particularly area that doesn't have surface water availability and area that is around critical infrastructure. Those things need to have dollars put to them.
Yeah, we're not like Westlands. Westlands can assess their growth. I mean, they're buying out spa areas slowly, bit by bit. We just don't have that ability here. We don't have the ability to raise the amount of money it would take to, retire ground in these sites and stuff. A lot of it's gonna have to be retired.
All right, let me, wrap this up because it's noon and we're way past our, so reminder to everybody, we have a meeting on the 26th right now. It's still scheduled for 10 a.m. And then the board meeting is scheduled for March 6th at 1 o'clock. So please get us your comments back by the 19th, and we're very much looking forward to getting everybody's, feedback on this. And let's see, Johnny, I will see you tomorrow. Sebastian, I think Deanna's gonna reach out to you directly as well for some other, issues. Steve, I'll see you tomorrow too.
Oh, yeah, lovely discussion tomorrow.
Yeah, all right.
Where's that?
Thank you, everybody. Progress, yeah.
All right, see you guys.